Healthcare is too expensive. Employers are offsetting costs onto their employees. Who will make health benefits affordable for hard-working Americans and their families?
You will! This is the Empowering Plans Podcast, a show dedicated to helping you once again emphasize the benefits in your benefit plan. Now prepare to learn,
Plan,
save,
and protect with the FIA Group.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the Empowering Plans video podcast. Nice to have that, aside from the audio, but you've got me today, Brady Bizzaro, here. I'm the VP of Consulting at PGC at FIA, and joining me is Brian O'Hara. Brian, want to introduce yourself to the crowd?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brian O'Hara. I'm a senior attorney in the Provider Relations Department here at FIA.
Awesome. So most of you probably already know who we are, but formalities aside, we have an awesome topic today that might sound technical at first, but it does have some pretty big real world consequences. Anyone that's dealing with provider data or ghost networks or IDR issues under the NSA, you will find this informative, hopefully. So we're going to break this up into two parts today because Brian attended a CMS webinar recently where they went over what happens when the IDR process goes wrong, which unfortunately is happening a lot. And I've been following some of the, aside from all the other goings on in the regulatory world about big, beautiful bills and changes to telehealth and all that fun stuff, there's also a lot happening on the regulatory side about establishing a provider database, potentially. And there's been some articles about that. There was a meeting at the White House with Dr. Oz and RFK Jr. where they talked about trying to get this off the ground again. They tried to do this in the past, but having a national database is what they intend to do. And I think these two issues kind of relate. So hopefully you can see why as we go through the presentation today. So briefly, what's the problem here? The problem is that provider directories are hard to keep up to date, and health plans are required to have them. But there's a lot of studies that HHS has commissioned that have shown that a lot of these directories are inaccurate and that they have errors in addresses and phone numbers, or even in which providers are part of the network. It fluctuates pretty often, and patients often struggle to find care, or they face surprise bills when plans are relying on faulty data. So CMS has proposed a solution using APIs, which is just that technical term for getting real-time information shared between systems, but they would have a central digital directory established that would consolidate data from a variety of systems, including the Medicare payment system, hospital payment systems, and this would allow plans, providers, and TPAs to pull standard provider information. So if they could do that, it would reduce duplication. It would make the administrative overhead more simplified for people in our industry, certainly, and really across the entire healthcare ecosystem. So what would the directory cover? What would be in the directory? If you think of it as kind of like a national hub of static provider data, it's going to have names, specialties, practice locations, digital contact info like emails or patient portals. And again, this would be sourced from CMS and other sources, including even the transparency tools that already exist out in the industry. So goal here to streamline updates, reduce errors, and make it easier to know which providers are out there and how you can get a hold of them. So one thing to note as well is if this does happen, if they do establish this directory, what would it not do? It would not include details about which providers are in network for which plans, because it does not track, or would not track, individual contracts or direct contracts that providers have in real time. And as we know, there's quite a few of those across the industry. That kind of information is really plan specific, and it's pretty dynamic in terms of how it changes, and it changes way too frequently to be managed in one national system. So if you're wondering if this would fix the entire problem of what's called ghost networks, no, it will not, but it is a step in the right direction. And it does matter for IDR, and that's where I'm going to toss it to Brian in a minute here, but many of the errors that crop up in IDR involve sending notices to the wrong email or making a ruling on a claim that was never eligible to begin with. And a lot of that comes from inaccurate provider data. So if you had a robust national directory established, it could help prevent some of those errors. And that would mean fewer messy disputes and fewer burdens on everyone involved. So in short, just to recap what is happening right now is they're inching toward, is the headline I saw here, establishing this national provider directory. It would be a step in the right direction for cleaner data across the board and probably lead to fewer preventable disputes. So it probably won't stop the chaos, though, once a dispute enters the IDR pipeline. And for that, Brian can tell us about some of the things that he saw when he attended CMS's latest webinar on this issue. And so, Brian, why don't you go ahead and take it away from there?
Sure. Thanks, Brady. Yeah, this issue that you're talking about, there are a lot of issues that we see with IDR disputes that need to be reopened after a determination has already been rendered. One of the big causes is providers that initiate IDR on claims that are in network. One thing that we often do is we go to the IDRE, the IDR entity, I should say, and we tell them, hey, this is not eligible, it's in network. And then, we can say we attest, or our client attests that this is in network, but a lot of times we don't have anything to be able to show them that it's in network. Now, technically, there's no burden of proof on either party, but practically the burden usually falls on the plan to prove its side, to prove, hey, this is in network, or it's not in network, or it's not in network, not having any kind of registry or anything like that to show really can make things difficult for the plan to kind of meet that burden that technically it shouldn't have, but that's a whole nother story. But as Brady mentioned, I did attend a CMS webinar on specifically on federal IDR technical assistance on errors identified after dispute closure. In other words, what to do if final payment determination comes back and there's something wrong with it. And we see errors all the time, like we were talking about, the in-network claims. We also see situations where a provider used the wrong email address for the non-initiating party. We've seen situations where the determination will say in one part that the initiating party or provider was the prevailing party, and then in a different part of the same determination, it will say that the plan or non-initiating party was the prevailing party, or claims that were just never eligible to begin with. And this is a really important topic for CMS to cover, because there is no actual official appeal procedure in place, no real guidance on this topic in the No Surprises Act itself. So it's just kind of been, like much of the No Surprises Act, reversing payment determinations has just kind of been the Wild West. You kind of reach out to the particular IDRE and you kind of hope for the best, but there hasn't really been any official guidance. So just to kind of quickly go over what CMS went over, I don't want to bore you with all the details, but they identified 3 types of errors that can be corrected. There was clerical, jurisdictional, and procedural. So a clerical error is basically if the IDRE makes a typo or something like that. Like, for example, if they typed the wrong amount of the final payment determination, they meant to write $1,000 and they accidentally wrote $500 or something like that. That's something where the IDRE can go back, request that CMS reopen the dispute, and then change it. There's the jurisdictional one is, if an IDR entity makes an incorrect determination on whether a service either is or is not eligible for IDR. For example, kind of like what we were talking about, if an IDRE rendered a determination on an in-network claim, they can go back if there's evidence that the claim was in network, they can go back and say, all right, this actually was never eligible. And then procedural, if the IDR entity makes an incorrect eligibility determination regarding whether a party satisfied or failed to satisfy a procedural step in the IDR process. So this would be, for example, where an IDRE rendered a determination on a claim where say the initiating party just failed to first initiate open negotiations, which is a prerequisite to initiating IDR. The process for reopening that CMS prescribed is that a party that identifies an error is supposed to reach out to the particular IDR entity and request a review. The IDRE is supposed to review that objection to determine if it's valid. And then the IDRE is supposed to contact the departments to reopen them. The guidance states that the IDREs should act promptly, but there's no definition of what prompt means. And it also notes that parties can lodge a complaint against an IDR entity that fails to take action. And then just very quickly, non-correctable errors, they went over this as well. They include any error made by one of the disputing parties. Like for example, if I meant to, on behalf of one of the plans, I meant to offer $1,000, but I offered $10,000. Well, that's an error made by one of the parties, and they're going to stick with the offer that was made. So something like that is not correctable. So some of the problems that I saw with this presentation, the departments mentioned, if you don't, if you see an error, then, contact the IDRE, and you can submit a complaint, or you can contact Federal IDR Questions, which is like the kind of main email address for CMS, if there's a delay. Well, the problem is IDRE entities fail to respond all the time. They are completely non-responsive except for a couple of them. They just don't respond to emails. They don't have phone numbers listed for them. It's incredibly difficult to get in touch with them. So when you email Federal IDR Questions to complain, Federal IDR Questions also does not answer. I've had requests out for over a year that haven't gotten responses, or I've gotten responses and they're completely unintelligible. I will say, hey, listen, this IDR entity has not complied with the rules. Here's why. Please, make a ruling on this. And I'll get in a response 10 months later saying, our records indicate that this is with this IDR entity. Please contact them. Not helpful. Not helpful at all. I already know who has it. I'm coming to you because I have an issue. I've also filed complaints through the official complaint form against both providers and IDREs. I have never had one of them addressed. So it's kind of like, I appreciate that they, mention the process for addressing problems, but the problem is, who polices the police? Who's actually addressing these issues? Knowing who to contact is not the problem. It's someone actually taking action and taking responsibility for when someone like me, or on the provider side that recognizes an error, somebody reaches out and actually does something about it. The webinar also didn't mention or address some of the other issues that we see, including what I would like to call nonsense determinations. And that's something where, like a final payment determination, where just no reasonable person with any knowledge of medical reimbursements could possibly come to the conclusion that an IDR made. We see this all the time. Like, for example, an IDRE awarding $12,000 for like the professional component of a CPT code 99283, which is like an emergency professional CPT code. Generally speaking, you're looking at a couple $100 reimbursement. You get these crazy determinations that are just completely outrageous. There's no way to, kind of appeal these or have someone come back and say, no, this is ridiculous. This cannot stand. There's no, they didn't address any requirement for reasonableness on defaults. So default judgments are an issue, which I'll talk about in in a few minutes, but if one party defaults, then the other party automatically wins. But there's no limit on what a provider can ask for, not even billed charges, which is ridiculous. And we've seen providers get more than their billed charges. Theoretically, a provider could ask for $1 million on a claim that was billed at $1,000. And there is nothing in the regulations and nothing that has been addressed in any webinar that I've seen that limits any of these types of determinations, which is very problematic. They also didn't mention, they also mentioned that challenging a payment determination does not stay the payment that's owed. So if a payment determination comes in and a plan owes money to the provider, that payment is due within 30 calendar days after the payment determination is rendered. If a plan identifies an error with the final payment determination, it still has to make that payment while it's requesting the case to be reopened and reviewed. This is extremely problematic because if the payment determination is reversed, it's then the plan's overwhelming burden to go back and try and recover the overpayment, which, as we know, especially in provider relations, we know is very difficult to do, is time consuming, is costly, and oftentimes just doesn't happen. The last thing I wanted to mention is that the webinar didn't address the major issue of default determinations like I was talking about earlier. Providers regularly initiate IDR and open negotiations on claims that are just categorically ineligible. So this means something like an in-network claim, an elective facility claim, professional services that took place at an out-of-network facility, things that just are not eligible. Because these claims are not eligible, there is no NSA disclosure language or contact information on the EOBs, and that's how providers know where to send open negotiations and initiate IDR. So what happens is when a provider initiates open negotiations and or IDR on one of these claims, it oftentimes makes it all the way through the NSA dispute resolution process and results in the default because the plan never got notice. And then eventually when the default determination is rendered, once again, the plan now has the burden of trying to undo a final payment determination. And going back to what we're talking about, the fact that CMS is unresponsive, IDREs are unresponsive, plans have to pay upfront even if a claim or even if a final payment determination is plainly incorrect. And aggressive providers who file complaints on late payments, plans end up making payments on claims that were never eligible, which is just completely unacceptable. Standard concepts that we know and understand in the legal community, like notice and due process, these are things that are just non-existent in the No Surprises Act. And they have very real world consequences. Plans are paying a lot of money, a lot of plan funds that belong to plan participants are going out to providers that shouldn't be. And unfortunately, these questions, I know I asked some of these questions. I know that other people who attended the seminar asked these questions. These questions were not answered. Pretty much only the softball questions were answered because I think they're a major problem and CMS just doesn't have a good answer for them right now. So, like I said, it continues to be the Wild West out there, and we're trying to do our best to do our little part of taming it. But for the time being, still seeing a lot of issues with it.
Yeah, it sounds like it'd be great for us if the definition of prompt was sort of undefined when someone wants something, right? Just take as long as you need.
Exactly.
getting softball questions. That's yeah. I think though with this program here to try and establish a directory, if you can fix errors up on the front end, right? That's probably in the short term to deal with the issues with IDRs to prevent them from happening. And if we can get better, more accurate data across the board, that's one way to do that. So we'll see. So just as we close here, I want to talk about what happens next with the plan, because there are some steps that CMS has already taken to move the ball forward here. And so they've launched a pilot program in Oklahoma, actually, this past June, where they've created a statewide provider directory for qualified health plans in the state of Oklahoma. They're going to evaluate how that works in the coming months through the fall and test provider verification, API function, and how burdensome this all is on the players involved. And then take that feedback later in the fall and lead to perhaps expanding the pilot program into other states and sort of in a phased rollout. So we do expect to see some movement here if the pilot works well. And certainly if we do hear more about other states partaking or some kind of regulatory action being written, we'll be sure to let you know. But yeah, inching in the right direction ever so slowly, as is the case with the government typically. So with that, though, I want to say thanks to Brian and to Pat Santos, our podcast host, for another episode here. Tune into our webinars going forward. We'll cover these issues in a lot more in more detail as well. But on behalf of all of us here at FIA, thanks for tuning in and have a good rest of your day.